Hello, in today's video I'm going to show you how to construct the springtime mug rug. I've already cut out all my fabric pieces that are required, and the link to the Design Space project will be in linked in when I post this video, and all the fabric requirements will be listed in that video also. So what I have here is I have everything that you're going to need to construct this project. I have my sewing machine right next to me. I have an iron. I'm actually using my mini Easy Press as my iron. It works perfectly for sewing projects. And I have, again, all my pieces cut out. This is what you're going to need to make this project. Now, some of this will be sewn and some of it is actually appliqued fabric. So the flower component here, this is all an applique. And I have fused, before cutting, I fused on the back side Heat and Bond Ultra Hold. Now I use the Ultra Hold because this does not require sewing. You just are going to adhere this by using heat to your fabric, both to the back of your pieces, and then removing the paper backing from this. Then you place this down on your final fabric, and you're going to press and adhere all this. You can either use a regular iron or your Easy Press. The mini also. They all work perfectly for doing appliques. Now, the instructions for the Heat and Bond are listed on the back, so go ahead and just follow those. I also have used a piece of fusible fleece. This you can find at any fabric store. It's got a scratchy side, and that's the side that the adhesive is on. And this is the back of my mug rug. So I laid this down with the adhesive side against the wrong side of the fabric, and we'll press that with the iron or the mini Easy press also to make that adhere. I have what my usual tools that I keep when I sew. I like to keep these handy by my machine at all times. I have a pair of scissors. You can use snips, whatever you prefer. I have my Mr. Seam Ripper. This is the handiest gadget for when you're sewing. And I also have a seam gauge guide. This has a movable component in it. You can see that right here. So I can set my different measurements that I might be using and just move the guide there, and then it's always set as I move it along in a project. I also have two different presser feet here. Either one of these is adequate to use for this project. You can also use your standard foot. I use my zigzag all the time as my standard foot on my sewing machine. It just stays on there all the time. And what I really love about this is that the measurement from the needle, your sewing needle goes right down into it, and either measuring to the right edge of the foot or to the left edge of the foot from that needle is 1/4 inch. This is a special foot called a 1/4 inch guide. If you're gonna interested in doing a lot of quilting, you're going to want to invest in one of these feet. And again, the measurement from where your needle goes through to this bar and this edge on the right side, right here, is 1/4 inch. And this also sticks down. You can see how that sticks down. So it'll run right along the edge of your fabric, just like that, and always keep you at a perfect 1/4 inch. The zigzag foot goes on top of your fabric, and there's nothing that keeps you from kind of veering either direction. So that's the benefit of having the 1/4 inch foot, and it gives you consistent seams. These are my binding pieces. There's a total of 4 of those, 2 short and 2 long. And what I did was I folded these in half first, lengthwise, and I gave this a press. Then I took one of the edges and brought it, the raw edge, to that center crease that I just created and gave it another press. And those we'll be using to hook all the different components together on this mug rug. So I believe that's everything we need right here. Like I said, I've cut it all out. If you need and have questions on how to cut your fabric, there's multiple videos that you can find around on how to do that. You can find my videos. I have it both for how to do the maker, how to cut fabric with the maker and the rotary blade, or with your Explore machine if you have an Air. And for that, the applique components, which have the heat and bond backing to it, those can be cut directly on your mat without any additional preparation. The other components need to be cut using the freezer paper hack, and I go over that in my video also. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew our 4 rectangle pieces together. And I use pins when I sew, but you can also use the plastic clamps if you'd like. These work really well. I just more of an old school sewer, so I like to use pins. Now with pins and with the clamps, you want to make sure that you do not sew over them. So you have to remove those before you get there. So I'm using the 1/4 inch seam allowance in all this project. So the distance, like I said, from my sewing needle to the edge of my presser foot is 1/4 inch. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lock my stitch in. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is turn this to a straight stitch. And sew forward a few stitches, then I'm going to sew back to the edge and come forward again. Always make sure you start on your fabric, not from the edge of your fabric here, because that'll sometimes have your fabric get hung up in your feed dogs. So I locked in both ends of this. I'm trimming off my threads back to my seams. Now I'm going to open this up, and you can see those are the right sides are now facing outward. So I'm going to take my next piece and I'm going to lay that on the edge that I want to add this to, just like that. Put this at my machine. Again, I'm starting on my machine, not at the edge here. And we'll sew these 2 together, and I'll continue until I have the 4 pieces sewn together. All right, I have my 4 pieces sewn together. I have taken this to my mini Easy Press and ironed my seams flat. Now, in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you just some basics of quilting, because that's exactly what we're doing when we're making this mug rug. When you iron your seams in quilting, you always iron towards your darker fabric. So this band here is darker than the 2 on the either side, so these seams are folded towards that fabric. This junction here, this is the darker of the 2 fabrics, so this is ironed in this direction. What that does is when you look at it from the right side, you're not going to see your seam allowances through these fabrics. That's why you always iron towards your darker fabric. So now what you're going to do is you're going to take your 4 pieces that you just sewn together, and you're going to pin that to one edge of your off-white or white square. And this is a square, so it doesn't matter which side you attach this to. So again, we're just going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance on this, and I'll be right back once I get that all stitched together. Okay, so I've sewn my 4 pieces together, then I attach them to my larger off-white or white square where the flower is going to go, and I iron this so that the seam goes away from this lighter colored fabric and it goes towards my 4 rectangles. So now we're going to form what's called a sandwich in quilting terms. We have our back fabric, like I mentioned, that we did the fusible fleece on to this side, and we're going to place that right side down. So right side down, we're now going to take our top piece and put this right on top, making a sandwich with the right side up. I'm going to pin all around this edge to hold this. And then we are going to quilt this together. Just a very basic, easy machine quilting we're going to do. It's called Stitch in the Ditch. And what that is sewing right at these junctions, or the ditch, between our fabric pieces. So it'll be very, very easy to do. And that helps to hold all these pieces together. Now on this blank area, you could also do some stitching if you wanted, or not, strictly up to you. I'm not gonna do stitching in this one. So when I stitch in the ditch, you can either do a basting length stitch, which in my machine is a 4, or you can do a 2.5 roughly, which is my standard stitch length that I use. So I'm just gonna keep it at the 2.5, and I'm gonna first stitch down this direction and through all my layers of fabric. And when you're machine quilting, you should start from whatever the center point of your fabric is of the stitching that you're going to do. So start with your stitching towards the center of your project and then work outwards from there. And that helps keep your fabric nice and smooth. So again, I'm sewing down here as close as I can to that ditch. And then I am going to turn and do the 3 rows of my stripes here. So I'm going to start with the center one and then do the 2 outer ones. I'll be back once I get all this done. All right, so that's the amount of quilting, machine quilting I'm going to do. So I sewed first along here, then I did each of these, starting with this one first. And you can see that's what it looks like from the top. And this is what it looks like on the back side. And by stitching like this, it gives you some depth to your project. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fuse now on my flower into this section here. So I laid out my flower pieces. Now these all have been, had the double-sided adhesive applied to the back. I removed the paper and I used Heat and Bond Ultra Hold. That's a non-sew adhesive. So once these are ironed in place appropriately, according to the manufacturer's instructions, you cannot sew on these flowers appliques. The Ultra Hold is a non-sew bond. If you wanted to do either hand stitching or a machine decorative stitching onto these applique pieces, you need to use the light hold, not the Ultra Hold. So I'm going to take this to my mini Easy Press and I'm going to fuse all these pieces to my project. Okay, so I use my mini Easy Press to fuse my applique pieces. I say it worked absolutely beautiful. Love how that looks. So now the last step is just to add the binding around the perimeter. Now what we're going to do, as shown in this video, we're going to attach the 2 shorter binding pieces to the back side of our mug rug. The long raw edge will meet the raw edge on the short side, and this is the raw edge side that does not have the second crease that we created. And you're going to sew that at 1/4 of an inch to attach it to the full thickness of our mug rug. And if there's any overhang, trim it off as you saw in the video. Now what you're going to do is you're going to tuck under on that first crease line the fabric, and you're going to pull that over to the right side of your mug rug, folding it along the second crease line, or excuse me, on the first crease line that you created. You're going to pin that in place so it covers the stitching that shows on the front side from when you attach the binding to the back. And you're going to sew very, very close to that folded line, as you can see in this video, to attach the binding on the side. Okay, so we sewed the two sides on. Here it is from the front, close to that fold line I stitched. And this is the back, what it's going to look like. And then now I took my other two binding pieces and I'm attaching them with the wrong sides together. And again, here's my center fold, here's my second fold. This side here does not have a fold. I'm starting this with the edge not being even. There is an overhang. This is cut a little bit larger than your mug rug will be. And I'm just pinning this raw edges together down this whole side, just like we did the little side one, except for the overhang at the ends. And that's on purpose, because you'll see here what we're going to do. So now, if you have too large of an overhang, you need maybe just 1/4 of an inch at the most. Just cut this down and then fold this so that the wrong sides go together. And this now ends up even with your binding here. That's what you want. And put a pin to hold that, and come down here to this other end and put a little pin in here to hold this. Just like that. And so now you're going to sew along these raw edges, 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm going to start this in from my edge. And I'm going to sew forward a few stitches, then I'm going to go back and I'm going to remove these pins. Keep this end folded over nice the way you've got it. And all the way to the edge, and then sewing forward now. Okay, so just like that. I hope you could see that. I know my hand was in the way. And coming all the way to this other end. And I'm doing the same thing, removing my pins. Coming to the edge here. And backing it. And locking that in. Now I'm going to trim this thread back down to my fabric. If you want your projects to look professional, always trim your threads back to your fabric so that you don't have a lot of loose tails hanging out. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing. We're going to keep that second fold tucked. We're going to roll this around on the first crease that we put in and put a pin here to hold this. Just like that, and we're going to go down the whole way, making sure we cover that stitch line where we just attached it. You don't want that stitching showing. So bringing this over to cover that. Okay, now on this end, we want to keep that little tuck that we put in there. And roll this around. And that finishes off that edge there so that you don't have raw edges on this binding. Now this does make it a little thick here. So you might have to hand crank your machine over that little edge. And we're going to do this down the whole way. And then just like we did the first time, we're going to stitch very close to that. And I'll be back once I get both of these final binding pieces stitched on, and we'll look at the final project. Okay, so there is the finished product of what the mug rug looks like. I attached the final binding. You can see here now in the corner how you don't have raw edges showing. And that is it. You can use this pattern for any season, really. I did this in more spring colors. You could change this up, do summer, do a red, white, and blue one, change your image that you put on it. And this is absolutely perfect to have with the mugs that you're creating with your mug press right now, with the sublimation mug presses. So I hope you enjoyed this project. You can follow me at Fabric Fun with Cricut Design Space Facebook group. It's the Sister Fabric group for Cricut Design Space. If you're a member of Cricut Design Space, just find the link to the Fabric Fun group in the announcements and you're in. Hope to see you there.